Alright guys, it's Ryan Kane. Today we're going to be looking at all things reverb. We're going to be looking at the basic stuff, we're going to be looking at the advanced stuff, we're going to be looking at what the different terms mean. We're also going to be looking at how this applies to trance music. This was actually suggested by Taylor Kennedy. He has the comment here. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Let's go. Alright guys, so this video is going to be kind of split into two. It's going to be looking at the basic stuff of reverb and then a bit more the advanced stuff. We're going to be using two reverbs to bounce between to get different comparisons. We've just got the basic Fruity Reverb 2 that everyone will have if you've got FL Studios. We've also got Acoustic Reverb here. Right, so where do I start? Many different reverbs will have different names for virtually the same parameter. It could be the colour, for example. That could just be how much frequency is being affected by the reverb. So it could have a high-end frequency reverb or could have a low-end frequency reverb. There's all sorts of different names, so we're gonna have to make sure I understand that to begin with. And second of all, I'll be talking about something called reflections a lot. So basically all a reflection is if you think about the sound being emitted and then it bouncing back off a surface back to your ears, that's a reflection. So if I talk about reflections, that's what you know what I'm talking about. So let's start. All reverbs will have these two main parameters. They'll have the size of the reverb or the size of the room and the decay. If you have a larger room, it'll take slightly longer for the reflections to come back, and because of that it will sound like a larger style reverb. That's it. If you have like a small room reverb, the reflections are going to come a lot back quicker, and it'll sound almost tinny, so it'll also sound maybe metallic. The decay is simply how long the reverb is going to last for. I look at it as a bit like the release on a synthesizer. So the longer the decay, the longer the reverb is going to be. Normally in a reverb, the size or the room size and the decay are linked. So if you have a larger room, you generally will have a longer decay, so it sounds a bit more like a cathedral type instead of like a bathroom. So here's an example. Let's have a quick listen to this on Fruity Reverb. I've reduced the size and the decay drastically. You can hear the reverb if I turn it off. Gone. Very small sound. I'll turn some of the wet up, we'll go to that layer as well. Decay higher, size bigger. Okay, the next one to look at is delay or pre-delay. See this as the attack parameter in a synthesizer. How long does it take until the effects of the reverb come into play? So if you have a longer delay or pre-delay, it takes longer for that reverb to take effect. That's trying to emulate the sound of real life. If you shout, for example, in a large hall, it's going to take slightly longer for the reverb to get back to your ear, so you're not going to hear the reverb instantly. You can use this creative as much as you want. This is what it looks like here in FL Studios as Fruity Reverb 2, and let's see what it sounds like in practice. Just takes longer. Now the acoustic reverb shows this visually. Okay, this is a lot easier to look. So if we look here, again we've got the decay, so this is how long it lasts. So if you look at this here, it's going longer. This is the pre-delay. So if you could see the front bit, it's not starting until a certain time. Another parameter which is a bit more advanced, you'll only see in some reverbs, is the attack. It's very similar to the pre-delay, but it's just basically smoothing out when the reverb comes in, so it doesn't come straight in after the pre-delay. It'll smooth up very slightly. Another feature that most reverbs will have is a dampening section. Now the dampening section is, in simple terms, kind of just takes off the high end. A bit more specific terms, it reduces the decay time of the higher end frequencies. So if you reduce the damp section here, it'll then reduce the time of decay of the higher frequencies. Basically it dims it down, okay, so you don't hear as much high end. Here's a good example. Doesn't quite work as an EQ, but it just reduces the decay time, so it kind of softens the amount of high end. That's it. On the other end, you've got this knob in this plugin called bass. Now it's just the complete opposite of the dampening. It just affects how long the decay time of the bass frequencies in the reverb. It doesn't always look like this. I'll quickly show you what an acoustic looks like. Now over here in acoustic, we've got a dampening section. Now you've got a lot more freedom in here because you can actually change the parameter of what you're dampening. So if you want to dampen the whole sound, it wouldn't be advised because you're basically just reducing the amount of reverb. You also have the multipliers here, so this tells you how much certain frequencies are being dampened. Moving on, you just have simple EQs as well. On Reverb 2, you've got a high cut, so this is reducing how much frequencies on the top end. So if I reduce this, it takes down how much higher end there is. And if I increase this, it takes off how much lower end there is. So let's say if I wanted a reverb, which is kind of in the middle. So let's say it's between 1000 Hertz and let's say 5000 Hertz. Your reverb would sound a bit... should sound in the middle. Now there's only a couple more basic ones left over to go through. So you've got diffusion. All diffusion is think about, again we'll have to go back to reflections. Having no diffusion on basically means that the reflections coming back are really there's lots of spaces between them and they're not dense at all. Okay, so think about the sounds coming back nowhere near each other. Okay, when you have full diffusion on, there's lots of reflections coming back. Generally, the full diffusion is a little bit more natural sounding. Now, if you drop the diffusion all the way down, it doesn't sound as natural in my opinion. It sounds a bit more metallic. But if you have the diffusion all the way up, it can really muddy the mix. So have a mess about with this until you get a sound that you're after. As I mentioned about the muddiness of those reflections, you can modulate the reflections so it's all not coming straight at you at once. This little button here, tab here called modulation. So all that does is it adds a sine wave to how those reflections are going back. So it kind of just changes the phase of them, if you can figure it like that. So they're not all coming back at once, so they're being modulated slightly. Now you can also change the speed of that sine wave. Okay, so the higher the speed, the more sine waves are going through per cycle. So that means it's going to be modulated more. Right, that just about covers the different parameters which I would generally use. Let's see what it sounds like in a trance track. Oh, never mind, there is one more parameter, but this is also in every other synth or whatever plugin you use. You've got the dry and wet signal. Obviously the wet signal just being the pure reverb coming out of the plugin. The dry signal is what's originally going in. So if it's a sample, you just hear the sample. If it's a synth, you just be hearing the synth. Okay, let's move on now. Okay guys, I've just had a little mess about with Autoacoustic to get a decent reverb out, and this is basically how I do it. So what I do normally, okay, is I drop all the dry down and I have the wet up to 0. Most people don't do this. I like to do it though. I like to hear the full wet signal before adding in the lead. Okay, I know what the lead sounds like, so I always go for the wet signal first. So I can't hear any of the dry signal, all of the wet signal. Most trance sounds, okay, especially leads, especially pianos in the uplifting style, have quite a high decay and room size. That's kind of the trick. Now if you're making some techier sounds, so a bit of tech trance, you can have shorter reverbs. If you're having a percussion, you can have lots shorter reverb, so it doesn't overpower and it kind of gives you that delay nearly feel. And this is what I've done here. Okay, I've taken out anything under 900 Hertz. Don't have to. This is what it sounded okay to me, but if you do put the lower frequencies in, it will sound muddier. It's just simple as it will sound muddier. I've also taken out anything over 2000 Hertz. You can have it higher, but this just sounded decent to me. So here's the high K, here's the high room size. Now also what's pretty cool feature you could do in Autoacoustic is how wide the reverb is. So again, generally the wider the better, as long as it doesn't sound awkward. I've added some diffusion, okay, so it's halfway through, so it's not super dense, the reflections coming back, but it's not metallic-y sound or anything else. I added a little bit of dampening on the top end, and this is what it sounds like. Wet, anyway. This is what I also do next. I'm going to add the dry signal to 0 dB, and then I'm going to add the reverb to how much sounds natural. Anything more, I just tame it down a bit, so let's see what that sounds like. Okay, so what we're going to do next is quickly look at a trance piano. Now, again, very similar idea to the leads. I like to have quite a large decay and room size, but personally, I like to take quite a bit of the top end off when it comes to these. So let's have a listen to the dry piano first. turn that velocity down as well so it's not as harsh. Okay, let's have a little go at making the reverb then. Alright guys, here's a simple reverb for you. So this is what it sounds like dry. Nothing on it. Then some reverb. That's not bad. It's not perfect. I'll be tweaking that a lot more with compression, etc. The rest of the jazz to make it sound a lot better. But that's a very quick way of doing it. Okay, I'm going to show you one last thing. This is probably the best way of doing it in my opinion. Okay, so this is the way I tend to do it. The only issue, it does destroy your CPU quite a bit. So what I like to do is, on certain instruments, I like to have a send bus for the reverb just for that instrument. If you look here, I've got the piano. This piano goes down to the master, as normal, but it also goes through to a reverb bus here. Now what I've done is added the reverb on the channels, and I've added no dry signal, and I've added nearly full wet signal. What's happening here is, because it's going through to the verbs, no, you don't want to hear any of the original sample going back to the master, because that'll just be doubling up the sound. You'll have sound coming from the piano and the verb going back to the master, which you don't want. Okay, you just want the original sample from the piano, but just from the verb I want the reverb coming through. So if you listen to the reverb without the piano going to the master, it'll just be this reverb like this. But if I put it back on, so normally you'll have it set up to full like this. That is usually way too loud. Use this as like the wet dry knob of how much reverb you want to go on your piano. So if I have it at full, it's going to be super loud. Drop it down. The key thing about this is you can affect this reverb independently away from affecting the original sample. So on it, or the insert tracks here, you can, for example, add compression just to the reverb. You can add EQ, which I tend to do a lot. So if I add the EQ here, I can change. So this is the reverb. I could change what the reverb sounds like by using an EQ here. So if I add, sometimes you might have a frequency which you don't quite like. Let's see if I don't like, oh, I don't like this sticking out here. Softens the reverb, so you can do many things with this. Extremely useful. I use that on every one of my tracks. It really has helped, especially on the effect side. Right guys, hope you learned something new here. There's quite a lot of information. I did say it was going to be a big one, so make sure if you've learned something, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I will be doing more of these videos as usual in the future. So until next time guys, see you then.